Hello and welcome to today's podcast. You're joined by me, Kavan, and this is the akhi&saltfish Digital Network. Today, I want to talk about a topic that is real close to my heart, but I'm sure it's close to yours as well. It's trust. Trust in many environments, society, education, healthcare is a vital pillar to success. And I'm joined today by a special guest, Dr. Emma Heron, who is the head of learning and teaching enhancement at the University of Northampton. She recently led a conference on trust and resilience in higher education, and I wanted to pick her brains and learn some more about that conference. So, Emma, her professional identity is fundamentally shaped by a career dedicated to improving student success. She is a compassionate and caring leader who believes that students are experts in their everyday experiences and that higher education works better when we understand how it is really experienced by our students. She regards all students across the university as genuine stakeholders in educational improvement, and she has a proven track record of successfully working between academic and professional services as well as students' unions to bring about impact, change, and at large scales. She's a senior leader in understanding student experiences through innovative, award winning approaches, such as her student listening rooms, and can demonstrate how effective listening to students has brought about meaningful change at an institutional level. While that's very impressive, I'm also keen to know about Emma's forays in gardening because she claims that she has high enthusiasm, but perhaps that enthusiasm outweighs her ability. So at some point, I'm sure we'll be able to get into that. Moreover, today, Emma, first of all, thanks for joining me. I want to get my manners out of the way,
No,
first of all. Really, really
you're
appreciate you being here.
absolutely no worries.
Um,
Pleased to
but
be here.
but secondly, a couple of weeks ago, you did this conference. It was a 2 day or two morning conference, and it was a fantastic opportunity for colleagues and other stakeholders across the university to get in there and learn about trust and resilience. Why
Mm.
did you feel like now was the right time to lead a conference on trust and resilience?
I think, thanks for having me, by the way. I think one of the key pillars in our university strategy is around trust, and that's trust with students, trust between students, trust with staff, between staff, and trust between staff and students, and vice versa. And it just felt like this was a good time to allow students and staff to have a space to reflect on this notion of trust and to um, understand how, through their learning and through their teaching, trust is a significant part of the journey that the students will make. So it was an opportunity, I suppose, to really provide space for delegates of that conference to listen to presentations and ideas around uh, a lot of the learning and teaching that we do, which either implicitly or explicitly talks about trust. So I guess it was
Mm.
a kind of a connection back to the strategy. I think the strategy is good in that sense. I think trust is fundamentally important to what we're all about at university. And as you said in that introduction about me, I genuinely think that all of us in higher education should be here to help students do the best they possibly can. And that is absolutely driven by trust being genuine uh, for everybody in both directions, from students to staff and staff to students.
So thanks for that. And now we're a few weeks removed from the conference.
Yeah.
What can we learn in reflection about our organisation after hosting the conference?
Okay. So I think my reflections on the conference were that we're doing an awful lot of really good work. There's lots of very dedicated colleagues to improving their students' progression through their degrees, giving them other opportunities outside of the curriculum. And I think, therefore, there is a good element of trust, I would say. That's not to say that we can't do more or that it couldn't be better in places. I think it probably could be. But my overriding impression from the conference was that it was a positive confirmation of what we do, but also a call out to, thinking more about how we can develop trust and relationships and that kind of relational pedagogy that I think is so important to the students, manage sort of the ability of the students to progress in the way that they want to.
So when we talk about relational pedagogy, can you unpack that a little bit,
Yeah,
just in case
so
any listeners aren't familiar
yeah,
with higher
so to
education
sound
or education broadly?
a bit jargony, apologies. So
Sorry.
it is about thinking about how we teach and how students learn and the importance of relationships within that classroom, or whether that classroom is face to face or online. It's about ensuring that we understand, as in the teachers would understand, the importance of knowing their students, and that is, and trust comes into this very, very
Mm,
strongly. So knowing their students, and that could be as simple as knowing their names, which sounds like a basic but is not always done. Not saying that's necessarily true here, but I think that's sometimes an issue with large classes, etc., across the sector. It's about caring. So it's about
mm,
caring for students and about students. It's about making sure that the sessions we provide are inclusive to all people who are in that session. So that could be, um, making sure that students can access the materials, that we've taken into account differing needs, that we can listen to students and their experiences, and that all of those their experiences are important and relevant, within the bound of that context of within the classroom. So it's really
yeah.
about students feeling like they matter. I think mattering is really important when we talk about belonging, which is a big part of the higher education language at the moment, I suppose. Mattering is to me, it's different to belonging, but it's almost more significant because students not only feel like they sort of identify with their university or their course, but that they matter, so that they're cared for. I think it's as simple as that, that they feel cared for. So
Thank
I
you.
think that's what relational pedagogy to me is about. It's about understanding difference, inclusion, caring, mattering, and respect.
And actually, I don't think anything you've said there is contentious.
No,
I
I
don't
agree.
think anything you've said there is a majorly complex concept for people to get their heads around in terms of implementation further on down the line. I think that's really encouraging to hear,
Mm,
that we do it so well in certain spaces and we actually haven't got that far to go in terms of implementing it in other spaces. So
yeah.
thank you for bringing that. And also, thanks for mentioning names as well. So if anybody is interested in names and the importance of getting names right in higher education, you can go back in the archives. A little while ago, I had a conversation with Jane Pilcher and Hannah Deacon Smith, all about their research on getting names right in higher education and the importance of that. So feel
Mm.
free to go check it out if you want any more detail.
I mean, I think
Um,
it's
Go
about
ahead.
getting names right, but it's also knowing who those students are.
Mm,
So, it's recognizing a face to a name.
yeah,
It's, if you're sitting in a class and you know that that person at the front of the class doesn't know your name, then you're not going to feel like you belong or that you really matter.
yeah. That invisibility is
Yeah,
damaging,
absolutely.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
so you gave us a really nice sort of headline of why you chose the conference and what we learned as an organisation about trust. So, as somebody who presented at the conference, I had a slightly a different perspective because obviously I was in essence trying to perform. I wasn't always able to
Okay.
be there in the audience. So
Okay.
I'm trying to get an understanding of some of the keynotes you had. What did they bring to the table? What were the standouts from the keynotes? And then we can move on to some of the workshops later.
Sure. Okay. So we had one, a particular keynote on the online morning, which was, as it happened, it was day two, but that doesn't matter in terms of the order. Professor Paul Morgan from Buckinghamshire New University, who was talking about, and I think very honestly and openly, about the journey that he has taken his institution on around improving metrics around continuation for students. That sounds a bit
Mm,
dull, perhaps, but it's really for your audience, the continuation is about how we ensure students who commit to coming to university are able to move on and progress from their first year to their second year,
mm,
and second year to third year, etc. And how the systems and the approaches that a university takes in terms of ensuring those students do continue on into their studies is really important. And it's important because it's a measure that universities are measured against in terms of their relative success rates. But it's also really important because I think ethically, and I know we know this and we think this, but ethically, if we take students on, as in we accept them to do a course, then
Yeah.
we are obliged, I'd go as strongly to say that we're obliged to support them to enable them to do their best. Now, for some students, carrying on with university isn't the way forwards, and that's fine. But for majority students who have problems passing their first year or second year, I think it's about beginning to, and this is what Paul was saying, it's about beginning to change how we as institutions think about that journey that students have and how we can address it. So his keynote was very much about how he began to change the culture in his organisation to help improve those statistics. And they're not perfect yet. And I think that's very hard to make those perfect stats. But that was the keynote about that. That was very much about trust from a staff perspective. So moving people on in terms of how systems work and talk together, or how we get staff to do certain things at certain times for students was not always easy, but it was about building up trust and that relationship amongst sort of university leaders and their staff to bring about change. So that was fascinating, and I think the delegates welcomed the honesty that he brought to that by saying
I
what
think
kind of journey it was.
what you've shared there about the honesty he brought, I think is I'm noticing. I guess I followed Professor Damien Page on LinkedIn, who's
Yep,
the Vice Chancellor
yep,
of
me too.
Buckingham New University, and I find his posts so refreshing because
Absolutely.
they are so brave and honest.
They're very
Well,
open.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming they're honest. Yeah. Um, because I don't know what the truth is, right? I'm not there, but the perspective I get is they're so brave, they're really open, and they're really honest. And it's fascinating to hear that somebody else who works there has come to us, been a keynote, and kept that same
Yeah,
tone of voice, if you will. And
absolutely.
for me, that speaks to
Absolutely.
the continuity in the culture. And I think as an organization, particularly one that is, in education and at the forefront of always challenging and reflecting ourselves and learning new stuff, honesty is a
Yeah,
pillar of all of that. And likewise with trust, believing what we say is a critical part of honesty and basically generating buy-in from whoever the stakeholder is.
absolutely.
So I'm glad to see the synergy there between the dean and the VC is strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you asked me about other keynotes. So we had on day one, we had our PVC for Student Experience and Education, Alice Wilby, along with Chief Executive of our Students' Union, Roger Weston, sharing their initial plans around a new student experience strategy. And they talked for a while about, I suppose, the attitudes. Well, let's start again. So in terms of the strategy, they put out a survey for staff and to students to ask about, well, what student experience mean? What does it look like? If we're going to have a strategy towards that, what things do we need to include? And they 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 highlighted some responses to that survey, many of which was incredibly positive about how students were, how they had how they managed and navigated their time, and what we therefore needed to recognise. But there was some negativity around some kind of approaches or attitudes towards student work. And I think that was disappointing to all of us to read that. Now, obviously, that's anonymised. That's members of staff who have wanted to say certain things about how they view
Mm,
students. And to me, that felt very sad. And these are pockets of people I wanted to say, because I think overwhelmingly it was very, very positive views about students and
mm,
student experience. But there are areas where some staff have concerns about how students work or their balance of their lives, or why they're coming to university. And I guess you could argue that that's a form of, in a way, a form of trust, that somebody can say what they really feel about that. I think they're challenging conversations to have, if we can, if staff wanted to talk about that more openly, because this was an anonymous survey. And I think that's not true particular to Northampton. I think that's true probably in the sector, that there will be members of staff who have arguably less than positive views about students, or views of students that aren't quite up to date with the real experience that student has, in the current day, in terms of challenging times, challenging pressing demands, juggling all sorts of different things at the same time, cost of living being a real issue for students. The list could go on. So I think, so that keynote was a quite thought-provoking one, in terms of how do we ensure that a student experience strategy lands well and is appropriate and relevant, which it will be, because looking at the sort of outline of it, it was all sensible and common sense, and the delegates agreed with that. For me, the takeaway from that was more about how do we begin to get an understanding of how students work and live and motivations, etc., to all staff. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, sorry, went on a bit there. So that is
no, not at all.
That was student experience strategy, and we've also had a keynote from one of our deputy deans, Sian Davis Vollum, who was talking about inclusive curriculum and the development around that for the university. So this is an approach where we think about everything that we do from an inclusive perspective. That sounds very, very big and very grand, but actually it's what we should be doing. It links it again back to sort of relational pedagogy, that how we design our courses, how we teach our courses, how we deliver, how we mark, how we interact with students, how we interact with each other as staff, should all be based on a kind of an inclusive approach, which again, to me, is based on the notions of trust and the notions of respect, I suppose. So she talked about that, and that's not to say that we don't do a lot of sort of inclusive work already. So we have a lot of time and energy spent when we're working with members of staff developing their curriculum on inclusivity. So we encourage staff to use what we call Universal Design for Learning, UDL, which is very much about getting the mindset of people to think about inclusivity from the very get-go, of thinking about what they're going to teach and how they teach it. But Sian's toolkit is to broaden that out much further to more everyday stuff that we do all of the time. So that was another keynote which was of interest and importance in terms of trust, because it's very much around.
I wonder.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I wonder if, when we talk about UDL, is there any examples that can spring to mind that might be able to illustrate that for those who are listening, about what is an approach within teaching that considers or is grounded within UDL?
Okay, so we'd be looking very much at ensuring that students can work their way through materials at an appropriate speed. Okay, so making sure that all of your learners in a classroom can work through the kind of the tasks that the lecturer or the tutor has set, and that's in order to do that, you need to have a variety of materials, that if someone has finished a task earlier, you can provide them with something else to get on with while other people are still reading, for example.
Mm,
That's a very small example, but it's about making sure that practically in a class all learners are accommodated, and don't feel excluded from the learning.
mm. And that can happen. That can happen really subtly, can't it? You know, it can be down to the examples you're drawing upon in the classroom. What are the assumptions
Hmm.
within those examples that people know
Absolutely.
exactly what the activity is or what the example is?
Yep.
Understanding that actually students are coming from different backgrounds,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and giving consideration to those the different places that students are coming from when they reach the classroom.
Yeah, and those experiences and backgrounds are often really, really valuable in understanding and learning about others, and
Mm,
about and understanding, how to put all of that classroom context into an applied sense, so an applied world. So it's really important to acknowledge difference
mm.
and to celebrate difference.
I want to circle back round to what you mentioned around the student experience strategy. You referenced that some responses in the consultation for that almost felt like there was a bit of a gap between what the expectations of students were and their experiences
Hmm.
were versus the reality of their experiences. And
Hmm.
I wonder if that gap between expectation and reality is like a trust gap. Because if you have expectations that are, bigger or smaller than the reality, it throws off your perception. There's a disappointment there, there's an unhappiness there, and arguably a
Mm.
mistrust there. Um, and I think that's why it's so important, going back to your bio and your experiences in terms of listening to students. That's why it's so important to listen to students, because when we host these conferences, I said a word earlier around I was performing. Like there's an intentional use of that word. We're
Yeah.
all performing at those conferences. We're putting our best foot forward and trying to share some knowledge and share best
Hmm.
practice. Naturally, I don't suspect that any of these sessions were based on how whoever breaks trust. No one stood up there and said, "This is exactly how I break trust and do not
No,
cultivate trust in my classroom," for example. So that's why it's so important to listen to students, to always keep your ear to the ground on what their experiences are,
totally.
because without that, we may be experiencing a gap between expectations and reality, and that could be sort of cultivating mistrust or distrust, whatever the phrase
Yeah.
is in that sense.
Yeah. Agreed.
Thank you. It's been really fascinating to sort of hear your reflections on the headlines that I missed at the conference.
Mm.
I wanted to touch on the word around resilience, because
Hmm.
I think resilience is obviously a key pillar of the conference that you delivered. And I wanted to get an idea of how that played out across the conference. So trust for me is quite easy to conceptualize because I've worked a lot in the space. But resilience, I think, is something a little bit more opaque for me. So how did it play out across the conference?
So tell me a little bit about what you mean there. Do you mean in terms of the concept and how people were talking about it, or
Yeah. What were the
yeah?
discussions around resilience? Was it around we need to be more resilient? Was it around this is how we build resilience, or was it around, because I've heard discussions around actually removing the need to be resilient and creating spaces that don't require us always to tap into those reserves of resilience.
Mm, mm. Okay, so I think
And I wonder how it took
I
shape in the
think
conference.
yeah. So I think there was, quite a lot of discussion, not always deliberately using that word, but you could pick up the importance of resilience um, across quite a lot of the sessions, in terms of a belief that, contrary to your final point there, I think that most of us believe that resilience is important, and it is something which students and staff need to be able to demonstrate and feel comfortable to. I don't know how I'm trying to say here. I suppose You can argue that you shouldn't have to teach resilience because, students should be resilient, or anybody should be resilient. But how you become resilient can be driven by lots of many factors, and
Mm.
the experiences of being at university, in my view, shouldn't erode confidence in individuals. That's not to say the challenges of learning aren't difficult sometimes,
Mm.
but we need to provide support, which we do in buckets here at Northampton, to students learning, so that they can begin to gain that experience and that confidence in what is quite a unique space in terms of studying for a degree.
Yeah.
So there was lots of discussion around in the conference about the importance of supporting students, and that's not to take a kind of a negative view of students, sort of saying, well, they're not resilient, therefore they need support. It's almost quite the opposite, is that actually we want to enable students to do their best, and so we give them opportunities, we give them support, we give them frameworks, and that support could be within a module, it could be within a course, it could be beyond the course with some of the services we provide directly to students, or any host of other things that universities are there for, to enable them to do their best. So the conference was much about that. I think there is a discussion about the difficult lives that many students lead, and that isn't supposed to sound patronising, but the challenges are real for students, certainly more real than, say, when I was at university, which is a very long time ago. That the things are very different, and that the challenges are different for students these days.
Mm.
So we need to acknowledge that. And I think, again, the discussions around the conference were acknowledging that, at the same time as acknowledging the need for moving on, teaching and learning, including artificial intelligence, for example. How do we use that? How do we trust students to use that? How do we trust staff to use that? So I'd say overall, I think the kind of the view of resilience was a constructive one, in the sense that students need it, and we're here to help them get it.
I think within that, when we talk about confidence and resilience, and I'm hoping you can flesh this out with any sort of academic legitimacy of what I'm about to say. But I did hear once, and I think I read a paper, but I can't remember it to quote off the top of my head, that the more we learn about a subject and we sort of cross a threshold, we actually lose a bit of confidence at one stage where we're learning more, we're developing more knowledge. Because as we're going through that learning journey, you almost, I don't know whether it's you doubting yourself or what, but the confidence dips. And then you cross that threshold, whatever it may be, and that confidence of knowing that topic builds and I guess firms up into a resilience of, okay, I have that knowledge, I can continue. But I say that to say the learning journey isn't one with linear growing levels of developing confidence, is it?
No,
So therefore,
absolutely not. No.
resilience is going to need to be used in those moments of dips in confidence, which are inevitable, so that you can continue.
Absolutely. And yeah, so it's not a straight line, is it? When you learn anything, and if you take a view of a university degree, at any one point you'll be usually learning more than one subject, or one module at a time. So and even within one module, from the beginning to the end of that, you'll have positive bits and you have dips. There's some weeks you won't understand bits, there'll be weeks where you do understand bit. So yeah, it's absolutely a wiggly line, isn't it, in terms of getting to that point where you have the confidence by passing that module, or doing well in a particular assessment. And yeah, that ability to pick yourself up, or to have others help you pick yourself up, is really important. And that's the role of the university to some extent to help students do that. I firmly see that that's part of our role. Personal tutors, module leaders, all there to support and to
Mm,
pass on that passion for learning, but also to enable students to access that passion in their own
mm.
ways, which takes time,
And
and sometimes people are quicker than others.
it's practice as well, isn't it? It's almost,
Yeah,
you almost, well, I speak for myself. I'll need a few examples sometimes. I can do this to remind myself that I can do it. So that
yeah,
first time, the first couple of times, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this.
yeah.
But it's actually, yeah, it's that practice and that ability to draw on those examples. And it's funny because if anyone's watching this, they'll see me. I smirked when you spoke about the difference between the modules, and some modules make you feel confident and others won't. I reflected on my own experience. And
Okay.
I won't name the bad lecturer, but I'll name the good one. So Jane Pilcher, who I referenced earlier as one of the guests in the archives, she was one of
Yeah.
my lecturers at uni, and she always had really engaging, positive lectures. One of her tools was she played sociology bingo. So she'd say at the start, "I'm going to say these three words, and once I've said the third one, shout out bingo, and I'll give you a point if you win." I won actually. I won a book, um,
Yay.
but but there was another lecturer who I won't name, and he was like super into a niche area of sociology.
Okay.
But what he would do is teach us some module material and then spend at least 50%, I now know on reflection, on something that was just a passion project but wasn't included in any level of assessment. And that
Okay.
was incredibly difficult because one, what he was talking about was super complex and difficult to understand because it was just his passion. There was no level of bringing us along. It was just he was sharing his passion. And then he
Yeah.
would say at the end of a 2 hour lecture, by the way, that last hour, don't worry about it. That's not going to be included in any level of assessment. So we're like, mate,
Okay.
like, you've just fried our brains and it doesn't matter. So then going back to trust, we didn't really trust or care to
Yeah.
engage in his lecture because we knew he was just talking about his passions rather than anything that was directly relevant to us. Now, to be fair, we might have been able to go along with him on that passionate journey, but he never brought us along. Is the point I'm making?
Mm.
So yeah,
And
it's fascinating to
yeah,
reflect.
yeah, and that's quite a nice example you've given there. I mean, there's two very different teaching methods, um,
Mm,
and one which the formal one is a nice way to keep you engaged and you know make sure you're all listening and what have you, and it's quite welcoming and warm.
mm,
The other one, the second example, you might argue that giving students a little bit of what's not in the assessment isn't a bad thing. Now,
mm,
I'm not, I'm not saying you spend 50% of the time on something which wasn't in the assessment, but it might still be an enhancement of the topic or an enhancement of the broad area that he's talking about. Um, so yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think you wouldn't want to just teach to the exam questions, would you? Because you're trying to give a broad appreciation of a topic or a content or a debate, whatever it might be. Um, but at the same time, it's very important that students come out of a session very clear as to why have I been told that topic?
mm.
How does it help me think about the assessment going forwards? Um, I mean, ideally, the extra bit would be you could include in your assessment somehow. It wouldn't be completely irrelevant. Are you saying it was completely unrelated?
I guess what I'm also saying is it was very boring. So
Yeah. Okay.
if it was entertaining and irrelevant, I might have taken it on board. But it was very boring. And what I don't want to do is he was also educated in an institution that was completely different to the one I studied at, and you could
Hmm.
see it. You could see it in the way he was
Okay.
teaching us. He was in his own. He was in his own stratosphere, and we just weren't there. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm always glad to see someone have a passion, but it felt like a waste of time. Is the point I'm
Yeah.
making?
Well, if it was irrelevant, then I think that's problematic. I think if it's slightly to the side of the assessment, but has some connection potentially, a little
Mm.
bit of time on that is not always a bad thing. But if it's an hour of irrelevant, then that's not acceptable in my view.
And reflecting on where I'm at as well, I think I would appreciate it more now because I actually appreciate reading more around my degree topic now. I'm so far removed from it than I did when I had a deadline and when I had things to do. You know what I mean?
Mm,
My
that's
my
interesting.
time then was much more get to the point, finish the degree. That was it. It
Yeah.
wasn't about enjoying the topic.
Yeah.
And I actually went back and read a few books that were on the reading list. I was my eye on, but never actually had the chance to delve into and enjoyed them. So
Yeah. Well, that's
maybe it's
good.
where I was at as well.
Yeah. That's sad though, in a way, isn't it, that you didn't feel able to do that at the time
Defo. The
because
amount
you
of
were,
pressure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that pressure is
I mean,
real. And, you know, it's
yeah.
absolutely, we need to understand that and listen to students more about that and adapt where necessary for
Mhm.
that, I think.
And I think
Mm.
talking about that adaptation, something that wasn't around when I was at uni, or maybe it was, but I didn't use it or wasn't aware of it. AI.
Yeah.
The classic conversation that everybody's having is, what does the future look like? And I guess my question to you, Emma, is what does the future look like when it comes to trust, resilience, and AI? You alluded to it earlier when you spoke about, how do we trust students to use AI?
Hmm.
How do they expect us to use AI?
Hmm.
What are some of the emerging conversations at UON regarding trust, resilience, and/or AI?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. It's a big thing that we need to embrace. So the discussions at UON are very much about we need to encourage students to use AI. Yeah. There's no
Mm,
point in pretending it's not there or that it's not to be used or it doesn't have its uses. It does have its uses. And what we're working on at UON is very much around well, we have already sort of advice for students and staff about how much do we want you to use AI in your work. So for some pieces of work, you know, it might be an actual task using AI. So to sort of actually force you to use AI in order
mm,
to create something, right through to using it to help form initial ideas and plans. But whatever level it is that you use,
mm,
we're saying just need to acknowledge how much you're using. So, and we need tutors therefore to be able to talk to students about what their expectations are for the assessment that they've written for the students. So it's really important that students have that opportunity to talk about the risks and the challenges of using AI, to understand the implications of that. Um, and I think, there's no point in saying to AI, in my view, because AI is here to stay and will change and will get better.
mm,
I think at the moment people say that we're at the stage where AI will never be any worse than this in terms of the technology, the capabilities, because it will be growing so quickly and so much that it will always be an improvement and kind of evolution of what we have now. So it become more sophisticated, or it become easier to use and easier to acknowledge what you use, I think. I mean, I personally, I still have some reservation about AI in the marking of student work. Now, that's a discussion that's going on across the sector.
mm.
How much should we use AI to mark student work? And I know other colleagues here at UON have very different views to me about that, and that's fine. It's because I think we need to debate it. I think whatever the outcome is, we need to be very transparent with what we use AI for, and that's part of the debate. Is you know, if we're going to use AI for any aspect of work, whether that's in assessment or you and I writing a report for a meeting,
Yeah.
I think we need to say that we have used AI and what element of it we've used. So
What are
there are
your
lots of
reservations?
my reservations about marking with AI
Yeah.
is I think that, and I might be proved completely wrong, but I think students feel that marking is a human activity, and I think marking is a human activity. Um, that's not to say, and I know people will say, but you can use AI to a certain extent to help with perhaps generating um, sort of the generic feedback. Um, but I don't know. I think I'm quite further back on this journey than other people are, and I acknowledge that. But I personally feel that it's students would expect their work to be read and marked by a person. I don't know what you'd feel about that, Kavan. How would you feel if your essay was marked? And I'm not suggesting at the moment that we are saying that we would
Yeah,
move to that, because we're not. Got a very firm view at the moment. We don't allow that. But you asked about what the debates are. This is one of
yeah.
them. And so what would you feel about that if you found out that your essay had been marked by AI?
It's interesting because this might be a reflection of me now. I don't think I've ever read feedback, and I haven't had feedback, essay sent in a long time, right? But I don't think I've ever read feedback and thought that is exactly on the money in terms of, okay, you've read every line the way I meant it, with the way I meant it to be read, and you've understood where I was coming from, and do you know what I mean? Like some even the good stuff. I'm like, okay, maybe you over mark that one or whatever. So even AI, I'd be skeptical of like the inherent biases that exist within AI, the way it's been developed,
Yep,
what type of material has it been trained on, and is that the way I
absolutely.
write? Is it not the way I write? I have a habit of writing how I speak, which I'm working on, and that sometimes is effective and sometimes it's not, right? And I don't know what AI has been trained on. Academic
Yeah,
writing is a very formulaic endeavor, and therefore perhaps that wouldn't be suitable for all types of student groups. Um, I probably wouldn't care though, depending on the grade. I think that's ultimately,
really?
principally, I wouldn't mind. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Principally, I think so. We're talking about feedback rather than the grade itself, right? It's the detail. It's the stuff you take home
Well,
with you
that'd be the
as a
marking.
student.
It'd be marking it. So it'd
The
be
marking.
assessing you, and so it would give you the feedback, and it'd give you the
Mm.
grade, because it would be measuring it against a set of criteria.
I'll be yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
My inst my instinct is, although yeah, it's interesting because then who do you go to for like if you want to, right? Rewind a couple of years ago, I did a project stepping into university, and Christine Collymore came on and did a video for that project talking about feedback and how you deal with feedback. And let's see if I can remember the acronym. She said RDA: reflect, discuss, act was her approach to when you get feedback. Reflect on it, discuss it with who gave you that feedback, and act.
Yep.
Who do you discuss with? Do you go to your module tutor, or is there a chatbot you're now discussing with? Because I would hate that bit.
So why is that any different? So if you hate that bit, why is it okay if something is marked it that's not a person? What's the difference? This is the problem I've got with it.
I think because I think I'm under the impression that most feedback, particularly at scale as well, when there's like a huge module, is like the school reports. My This could be a false impression, by the way, but my impression is like most of them are just copied and pasted anyway, or like there's a formulaic way of giving the feedback anyway. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
detailed or personalized in that sense. So
I
outsource
think
it.
that might, yeah, I don't know. That might be true of school reports. I think staff put in a lot at university, put in a lot of time to write their
Mm,
feedback personal to the student, that it's tailored to the student, um, and it's tailored to their work, so, obviously. But I I've heard that you can have sort of word banks for giving feedback.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm sure that does happen, but nevertheless, I still think even if you use word banks or phrase banks, whatever the terminology would be, you're still making the decision about that, and you're still largely writing it as a human being.
What I would
I
say
Yeah, go on.
is I can see a long tail of problems if we leave marking and feedback to AI. So I actually, like I said, I don't think I have an opinion either way on that particular issue. But contextually, that also means, like I said, the reflection's quite difficult, or the discussion's quite difficult in receiving that feedback. It also perhaps means the context that a lecturer may be able to use post that assessment in terms of, okay, I recognize that you know perhaps argument structure wasn't strong for you in this one, so let's have a quick word after the lecture about how
Hmm.
whatever the argument was structured in the lecture. And also, I'm a bit concerned about jobs for lecturers, because if you're not marking it, can we go upstream and well, do you need to set the assessment? And then do we go upstream there? If you don't need to mark it or set the assessment, to what extent is the material? Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think it's quite a slippery slope. So, like I said, I don't care in isolation, but in context, I think it's quite. I can see how it would be
Mm.
problematic and lead
Mm.
to, I guess, a loss of authenticity or humanity.
Yeah, I think for me, it's also a pivot back to the idea of trust here. That when I think assessments are very high stakes, aren't they? That you become quite if you're working on assessment, you can feel quite vulnerable if you're putting work forwards, whether that's an essay or it's a piece of designware or whatever it might be. This is you've created this, um, and therefore you're quite exposed when you put
Mm,
your piece of work in to be marked. And I think that level of vulnerability needs to be treated with care and respect and trust by the person who's marking it. Now, you might say, well, a machine or an AI thing is not human, so there's not trust and there's not mistrust. But I don't know. I still think that relationship there is important in the marking. But I think we could talk about this for hours.
I think what's fascinating is the conversation is obviously emerging, and no one has picked a side yet um, that everyone else is agreeing with. So the fact that the debate is ongoing, I think, is a great place to be.
Mm.
And like you said, AI is not going to get much worse from where it is now. It's going to
No.
keep permeating our lives. It's going to be everywhere. So um, let's, watch this space and see how it unfolds, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
I'm conscious of your time, Emma. How long have
Yeah.
you got left?
4 minutes.
Okay. What can we do in the next 4 minutes? The key thing from my session was actually I
Yeah.
gave the students a lot of space, and I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure I included an interactive piece where we heard from staff about what they might need in terms of how we progress the concepts that students were bringing. So students were essentially saying to us in my session that small acts of kindness matter. Trust is achievable, but it is fragile. Consistency and persistence are key in building trust, and the idea that there might be a shift in treating people how you want to be treated to now treating
Hmm.
them how they want to be treated. That small shift in hearing, listening, and responding to students
Hmm.
rather than trying to assume that your worldview is the right and only worldview.
Absolutely.
That is one key way of building trust. I'll rattle through this because also trust, the way we've spoken about it, perhaps bar the AI conversation, was very individual based. That
Hmm.
relational pedagogy, as you said there, I knew I'd bring it back one day. Um, it's all about those interpersonal relationships, but also there's quite a systemic approach or need for consideration when it comes to trust, isn't there? Because when
Mm.
we talk about how we give people time to acquire those skills to build trust, that's a systemic approach. That's not interpersonal, or that's not individual. Sorry. So staff responded to me in my interactive survey in the session that they need time and capacity. They need clear guidelines, like the trust guidelines, perhaps. Get in touch if you want to know more. They need clarity and clarity on confidentiality and safeguarding, and
Mm.
some training on basic things like empathy, cultural competencies, and customer
Mm.
service. So, what are your reflections on what staff say they need, and how do we get to a space where trust becomes what we do? And I mean, like you said right at the start, it is what we do in many spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like your approach to gardening, if it's not regular, consistent, and intentional, that plant will not grow.
No,
I got it in there.
you got it in there. I'm impressed by that. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah, I think, say the question again. You're distracted now by plants.
So, so given what staff said they need around time, capacity, clear
Yeah.
guidelines, a
Yeah.
shared responsibility across their
Yeah.
teams, what's next for trust?
Okay. So I think staff development is important. And I think, as you know, because you're working with me on it,
Mm,
giving staff who have a particular role, looking after a small number of students as their tutees, I think giving staff training opportunities, an opportunity to ask questions about how to do certain things, how to, when to refer students to different places, et cetera, I think is one way that we can build trust. And that's trust for staff in roles which are quite challenging roles. And therefore, if we provide them with support and training, they'll feel more confident in the role, and I think that will increase trust from the members of staff to the university by providing that training, but also will allow their relationship with their students to be strong and follow through that role, which will allow trust to be built where it isn't already, or it is there in a lot of places already in the university, but where it could be better, might be improved for trust. So I think it's about staff development, staff confidence. I think it's about two-way respect. So I think it's respect from staff towards students and understanding how students live today, all the, like I said before, all the issues that they've got, all the competing demands they've got, to fully appreciate that and what it's like. Again, most staff do appreciate that, but at two-way, I think it's also important that students respect the university, the space, the coming and attending sessions, the engaging, participating where they can, or even to reach out for help if they don't. And I know that that's a difficult thing sometimes if they don't feel that they have trust in the institution. But I think it takes both sides to move gradually towards that, where there isn't there already. Does that make sense?
Agree. That partnership is really important. Yeah, for sure. Well, Emma, thank you. And I guess my final question to you is, why should we trust you?
Well, without blowing my own trumpet or tooting my own horn, as some people say,
do it. Go for it.
I think that through my own research area and the work that I've done around listening to students, I think I do fundamentally believe in students. I'm an advocate for students, and the work that I've done through all of my very long career and my research area has always been around the importance of letting students speak, be heard, and do their best, and to support them to do that. And so I guess I will just say that you can trust me on this because I'm fundamentally student-centered and student-focused. That's what gets me up in the morning.
Thank you. And well done, first of all, for bringing the conversation to the forefront. Thank you for joining me for this last hour.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, Emma.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So there we have it. That has been a great conversation with Dr. Emma Heron from the University of Northampton. She is the head of learning and teaching enhancement. And essentially, that was a great conversation where we touched on trust, why she brought a conference to the university, what she learned from it, what she hoped to achieve post-conference. And now there was a great debate also on AI and marking. So let me know what your view is AI and marking. Would you care if your essay was marked by AI and your feedback was given by AI? I was sort of on the fence, like you say. I can sort of understand some of the long tail effects of that, or the potential long tail effects of that. But equally, I sort of just want to get my mark and leave. So in many ways, I'm quite transactional in that sense until it goes wrong, I guess. So I should probably think bigger and actually rule out AI when it comes to marking and feedback. But the debate is ongoing and I look forward to following it quite closely. That has been a fantastic conversation between myself, Kavan, from the akhi&saltfish Digital Network, and Dr. Emma Heron. This is the akhi&saltfish Digital Network, and you can email us at akhi&saltfish@gmail.com if you want to get in touch or hear anything else about any of our other episodes. Like I said, we have so many fantastic episodes in the archives, including getting names right in higher education, inclusivity, and so much more. If you want to know, hear from artists in across the world, you can find it in our archives. That has been it. I've been Kavan. Take care and see you soon.